When you decide the time has come to build your own commandlet, you have a choice. You can either build it using .NET or with script. Now there are some advantages and disadvantages to building a commandlet in .NET. Among the advantages are the fact that Visual Studio and the related tooling is just incredibly good, and that you get a compiled, robust application that exposes your commandlets. The disadvantages are that you probably need to use .NET or some set of tools that if you're an administrator you may not have convenient access to or maybe even a license for. And it's probably also a disadvantage to you from your perspective that it's compiled because you can't easily change it or copy it and modify it slightly. And then finally, and probably the biggest disadvantage, is that a commandlet which is stored in an assembly is going to require you to get that installation, or rather to get that assembly over to the client machines if you're going to be doing remote scripting. But if you decide that in spite of the disadvantages, or rather that the disadvantages are advantages from your perspective, you need to do some things to be able to do that. Of course, you're going to want to have some way to build .NET applications, probably Visual Studio. But you're also going to want to install the Windows SDK for Windows 8, which is going to include the reference assemblies for PowerShell 3.0. And if you want code samples, you can get those online at code.msdn.microsoft.com. And that's the code repository for all of Microsoft's samples, and so you'll have to go to the little navigation pane on the left-hand side of the page and filter it down to find the PowerShell stuff. If you don't want to have to go online, you can download the Windows PowerShell 2.0 SDK. 3.0 is backward compatible with PowerShell 2.0. And when you install that, the code samples are going to be in program files under Microsoft SDK's Windows V7 Samples Sys Management. So once you've got everything set up and you're ready to go, you're ready to start building a commandlet. And to do that, you're going to require at least the system management assembly, which you can get by just referencing it, and the system management automation assembly, which you'll have to get from the reference assemblies folder, which is why you need to install the SDK. There are two base classes that you can use for commandlets. The first is the commandlet base class, and it's the simplest one. It stands alone all by itself. There is another one called PS Commandlet, which subclasses the stock or the basic commandlet class. And PS Commandlet is the one that you would use if you need to interact with the PowerShell host program. So to keep things simple in this demonstration, we're going to build just a basic commandlet. All right, so now I'm going to jump over to Visual Studio and begin the process of creating a new, very simple commandlet to show you how it's done. Alright, so here we are in Visual Studio 2012, and I'm going to start my project by making a new class library. So I'm going to choose Windows and Class Library, and I'll give this thing the name of Sample Commandlet, and choose OK. Alright, and now I'm going to need to reference the system management assembly, and I'm also going to need to reference the system management automation assembly, which is not here, so I have to browse for that. Now this is going to be in the reference assemblies folder where I installed the Windows 8 SDK. So instead of browsing to it, I just like to use the find. So we're going to go system.management, and there it is, system management automation.dll. Don't let the fact that it's in the x86 folder bother you, and I will choose OK. And I'm going to go ahead and delete this class because I want to make a new one for my sample commandlet. And since this is just about the basics of building commandlets in .NET, what I'm going to add is a new class to this, and we'll call this class Show Hello. because of course it's going to do a hello world style demonstration. And if everything is good, I should be able to subclass this with Cmdlet. Right, so there's using system management automation, and so far so good. All right, so let's talk about what we need to do to actually add some functionality to this thing. Now, eventually, when this Cmdlet has functionality, we're going to load it into PowerShell by using the import module command, and we're going to pass the DLL itself. And once it's in PowerShell, PowerShell can use reflection to examine the Cmdlets to determine what it needs to do. But it's going to start off with a set of operations that we can override, and these are the same as the operations that we can put into an advanced function, which is going to participate in pipeline render. So the thing that we're always going to implement is process record. Process record is the main thing that the Cmdlet is going to do. Now, if we're going to be doing some work that requires some setup, we can also implement begin processing, and begin processing runs once right before the processing happens for process record, and process record could happen over and over again based on what's in the pipeline. When everything is done, then end processing can fire, and in end processing we can do the last little bit of work that we need to do. So if you're familiar with advanced functions, you'll recognize that this corresponds to begin, process, and end. And the Cmdlet base class also adds in a stop processing. And stop processing is where we would do any cleanup that we needed to do after the Cmdlet was finished. So this would be dispose generally of open database connections or file handles or those sorts of things. And stop processing is going to fire even if there's an error in the rest of the operation. So once we have a class which inherits from Cmdlet and we've implemented or at least stubbed out the override methods that we need, we're not done. Because like I said a second ago, PowerShell is going to use reflection against the module to determine what's in it. And when it does that reflection, it's going to look at attributes that decorate the class and its parameters. And so the main two attributes that you will use are the Cmdlet attribute, which identifies the class itself as a Cmdlet and provides the verb and noun pair that are used in the PowerShell window, as well as the parameter attribute, which is used to decorate whatever input parameters we have that our Cmdlet requires. And parameter attribute is fairly sophisticated. We can specify all sorts of things about our parameters, including help. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to stick to the very basics. I'm going to make a parameter ultimately that is simply required along with a little bit of help. All right, so let's go back to Visual Studio now and continue working on our sample Cmdlet, which is going to show hello. All right, so let's start by decorating show hello to indicate that it is in fact Cmdlet, and this is done with the Cmdlet attribute. So in C#, the way we decorate classes and methods and properties with additional information that reflection can use is with attributes, and the attribute is denoted by a square bracket that sits right in front of the thing that we're decorating. And so the attribute that we want for this one is the Cmdlet attribute. All right, and you can see that we have IntelliSense knows that this is the Cmdlet attribute from automation. Now, Cmdlet attribute has a couple of overloads on it, and we're going to use the first one. So at the very minimum, we need to provide a verb name and a noun name, right? So all Cmdlets have a verb-noun pairing, and this one is going to show hello in the console window. And so the verb name that I've chosen to use is going to be show. Now I could just type in show as a string, but there is a class called verbs common that has all of the common verbs in it. And so I'm going to say this is going to be verbs common.show. And then for the noun name, of course, this is your simple basic hello world demo. And so we'll say this noun is going to be hello. So when this runs, this is going to be the show hello commandlet. Now the class now needs some sort of functionality in it, and so I need to at least implement process record. And the commandlet base class itself has all sorts of useful properties and methods that all commandlets need to have, and one of those is the one that you're probably always going to implement or use at some point, which is write object. And write object sticks the object that you want to send to the pipeline into the pipeline. And so what we'll do is we'll just say hello world. Write object hello world. All right, at this point I'm ready to build my solution, and so I'm just going to come up here and go build solution. And in order to test this, I'm going to need to load up the module by importing it. So I need the assembly. And what I'm going to do is just right click on the project and go to the open folder in File Explorer command, which is going to open up Explorer for me, and drill down into bin debug so that I can be lazy and just copy this whole path out of Windows Explorer. And now I'm going to come over to PowerShell ICE, and I'm going to import module. And it doesn't like this because it's got a space in the name, so I need to put this in quotes. And then I can just go backslash and pick sample commandlet.dll and hit enter. And if everything is working right, I should be able to see show. Oh, let's see if this is actually working. No, I've done something wrong. Right, so let's see if we have a module loaded here for sample commandlet, and we do. So there must be some sort of a syntax error over here in my actual commandlet. Now, one of the problems with this is that once I've loaded up that assembly, I have to close ICE in order to, or whatever I'm using to test it, in order to make it work. And the problem, now that I'm looking at this, I've been looking at it, scratching my head thinking, what did I do wrong? The problem is that my class is not public. I don't know why Visual Studio always sets classes up to be private by default, but that's the mistake that I just made. And so we'll build this solution again and come back over and run Windows PowerShell ICE. And I started it up twice, so we'll just use the first one here. Now, this is kind of a good example of where a profile would come in handy. If I was building a really complicated commandlet, or rather module, that I was going to constantly be loading and unloading, I probably would set up my profile during my development session to import that module so that I could just close, build, reopen, and test. But I'm going to stick with nice and simple here, and this is once again got a space in it. So we've imported it, and now hopefully that this is public, we should see show hello, and there's hello world. Alright, so so far so good. Now we're going to take this commandlet and add a parameter to it, so that instead of saying hello world, we can be a little more personable and greet the actual person we want to say hello to. So I need to close ICE. I need to close the first one I opened, not the second one, because the second one doesn't have the module loaded up. We'll just use that as convenience and keep number 2 open. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a property inside of our commandlet class, and that is going to be a public string name, and we'll just use get set automatic property. And I need to decorate this property with an attribute so that PowerShell knows that this represents a parameter that's going to be passed in to process record when it runs. Alright, so the attribute for this is the parameter attribute, and this is system management automation parameter attribute. And you can see that it has a whole bunch of different named parameters that we can add onto it. And what I'm going to do right now is just be very simple. So I'm going to say mandatory is equal to true. And we will also say that we're going to put a help message on this just in case somebody is not sure what name means. So I'm going to say help message is going to be equal to the name of the person we are greeting. Now, if I'm going to the trouble of building a custom commandlet and a custom module, then I really need to also be providing help for all of the stuff that I'm providing, because the very act of doing this implies that I'm going to give it to somebody else and that it's going to be subject to reuse. But I'm not going to cover all of the ins and outs of help right here. It's very well documented. So right now we have a help message for this commandlet just for this one parameter. And we'll come up here to write object and change this to be a string.format. And now we're going to say hello to the name. All right, so this looks good. I'm going to go up here and build this solution. And how about that? I still have that on the clipboard. So we're going to once again import the module. And by the way, if I forgot to close PowerShell ICE and I still had it open, what would happen in Visual Studio is I would get an error at build time because it would tell me it could not overwrite the DLL. All right, so now if we say show hello, because this is a mandatory parameter and I hit enter, it prompts me to provide the name. And I can type bang question mark and it'll say the name of the person that we're greeting. And so my name is Doug Ware. And it says hello Doug Ware. Now I don't just have to rely on this behavior that we saw. Once I start adding help, then it becomes possible for me to actually use the get help command. So if we say get help for show hello and say I want the help for the parameter name. Now this is the first time I've used this machine, and so because I'm using get help, it's prompting me to update all the help modules on my machine. But I'm going to say no and just let this run, and we can see that we get help, the name of the person that we are greeting.